on the one hand, snap out of it is addressing a really important topic, and there are some good moments. But on the other hand, I think they took the wrong approach at several points in the episode. Snap out of it is the 4th episode of the 6th season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Matthew Diamond, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I had a lot of different emotions in a very short space of time. When I pulled up Disney Plus and saw the thumbnail for this, I got very excited because I recognised Martin Mull immediately. Very happy that Martin Mull was in this. And then we find out what his character is presenting, what the role of the character is, and I became a little concerned and a little emotional. I'll talk about that in a moment. We do have a subplot that I'll discuss first of all. Blanche has a birthday coming up, so she's sleeping with younger men, and she doesn't want to acknowledge that she's getting older. Rose wants to throw her a birthday party. Rose tries to find out her actual age. It doesn't go according to plan, and I'm flying through this part of the narrative really quickly because it's just padding, and it works well. It's not bad. It's quite a light-hearted part of the episode. They could have taken a more serious angle with it and made it more emotional as Blanche realizes she's getting older, but I like the fact that as padding to the main narrative, it worked quite well, and ultimately Blanche is happy that she gets a party. Then we come to the main narrative. And this happens because Sophia asks Dorothy to help her with Meals on Wheels deliveries. And they go to this building and they're delivering the meals, and a meal is delivered to a character called Jimmy. This is, of course, Martin Mull's character. And there are some questionable attitudes very quickly. And I kind of like the fact that they touched on this, but I'm not necessarily a fan of the language, because Dorothy said to him, "That meal can't be for you. You don't look disabled." And I felt a little bit sick when she said that. "And you're not old." Basically saying that because she, looking at him, couldn't see a reason that he needed the meal, she judged him based on his physical appearance, which is obviously not acceptable. I feel like in today's age, that's a little bit more obvious that you don't judge somebody based on how they look. Back in the day, maybe not so much. And we learned that actually, and this is the bit that I kind of struggled with, we learned that he hasn't left his apartment in many, many, many years. And this is when I became a little concerned because I have been in that position. Not for the same length of time as Jimmy, but for many months. I go through phases where I don't go outside, and at one point I didn't go outside for more than half a year. I didn't step outside the front door or the back door for more than 6 months, which I won't go into in any real detail. Thankfully, I am over the worst of that, but instantly it meant that I understood how Jimmy felt. And it made me, admittedly, a lot more critical of how they handle this in some of the episode. They're very much... They're trying to show that this is something people deal with, which I think is obviously important. But the attitudes and some of the actions are not great. Dorothy refers to it as being pathetic when she's talking to Sophia, that it's a pathetic existence. Which, yes, on the one hand, it is. If you're in that position, you can call yourself, or you can call your situation as pathetic. But that's not a word somebody else should be using to describe your situation. So I didn't love that, and there were no repercussions for using that word. And Dorothy also said, and this is something that might not have meant anything to me if I didn't have any experience, but Dorothy's spending time with him, trying to help him, and she speaks with him on the phone, and she says to him, "So what's new with you?" "Of course, nothing." She didn't mean it nastily, but as somebody who's been through that, and if I'm on the phone with somebody and they say, "So what's happening in your life? Any news? Anything interesting happening?" And every single time the response is same old. Because of course nothing new is happening. I hadn't left the house in over 6 months. That attitude there of saying, of course nothing, is just really disgusting. It's unhelpful. And again, she didn't necessarily mean it to be nasty or critical, but a lot of the language in this episode is really unhelpful, and there are no repercussions for the language that's being used. So I do have a lot of issues with how Dorothy is talking to Jimmy. But again, on the flip side, she is trying to help him. So it's kind of a little bit balanced. There are some great aspects. There are some really unhelpful aspects. He starts to trust her. And then he asks her to live with him, which seemed a little bit extreme. And she says no. So he instantly feels rejected. But eventually she persuades him to go down to the store, and I absolutely hated what they did with this. They go down to the store. He seems to slowly be getting his confidence with this. He's putting one foot in front of the other, and then he walks into the store, and immediately it's a fanfare. This banner drops down, it's noisy, he is the millionth customer, and immediately what that's saying is those things you fear could be real. Because he feared going out in public, getting all of this attention, being in a noisy situation, being in a situation that would make him want to escape. Now, most of the time, that's not going to happen. You can go to the store, you can buy your groceries, you can leave. Nothing's going to happen. But here we had evidence that, for Jimmy, that fear became a reality. And what's that telling viewers? Well, it's saying if you go down to the store or if you try and do this big thing that you're really scared of, those things you're scared of might actually happen because they happened to Jimmy. And it was absolutely a really ridiculous, irresponsible thing to do. They tried to do it for the comedy effect, absolutely. And I was just outraged that they would do that. Because all they're doing is telling viewers in a similar situation that if you do that big step and you go to the store, this could happen. Now, granted, the odds of there being a fanfare and a banner saying you're the millionth customer is very unlikely. When you're in that frame of mind and you think that everything that could go wrong is going to go wrong as soon as you step outside that door, and the episode shows that for Jimmy that did happen, you're reinforcing that belief that these things could happen, and it's going to cause a lot of problems. So I feel like it was irresponsible, it was not the right decision at all. But nevertheless, Jimmy actually does turn up at Dorothy's door. And I feel like it was an adrenaline thing. I don't feel like, based on personal experience and other people I've spoken with, I don't believe that this is now Jimmy. I don't want to use the word cured because it's always going to be a potential problem that can reoccur. But I don't believe that is now Jimmy able to just walk around freely and is completely over being stuck in the apartment. I believe it's sometimes going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe even 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's always going to be a process. But just seeing Jimmy finding that initial confidence to go to Dorothy on his own, I thought was a really great thing. And then they ruined it by taking him into the kitchen where Blanche's party was happening. And that was noisy and busy, and he ran from the situation. And that's how we end it with Jimmy. We see him fleeing the house. That's the end of Jimmy's story. That's not helpful. That's not positive. That's not reassuring to people in this situation. And I'm so surprised by this, because usually when the Golden Girls addresses a very sensitive topic, they do it fantastically. They do a phenomenal job with it. And maybe it's ignorance. Maybe, and I could be wrong about this, but maybe they didn't actually consult anybody with that experience. Maybe they didn't speak with anybody going through what Jimmy went through, what I have gone through, what many, many people have gone through, and they just wrote the episode imagining how things could play out. Maybe they did speak with somebody and that person had a very different experience and it doesn't represent everybody. That is also a possibility, but I think they completely ruined a really important message by actually reinforcing the beliefs that scary things can happen if you walk out the front door. Now, obviously, we all know that scary things can happen, but as we see in this episode, Jimmy's fears became a reality, and that means that if you're in Jimmy's situation watching this, it's very easy to have your beliefs confirmed that scary things will absolutely happen if you walk out that door and cross over that threshold. So, a very irresponsible episode. Yes, I applaud them for showing that some people can experience this, but they completely went about it in the wrong way with the action of the episode, with the grocery store and the party, and ending it with Jimmy just fleeing the scene, and also with Dorothy's attitude saying that it's a pathetic existence and saying to him, so what's new with you? Of course, nothing. Horrible language, really disgusting way to treat Jimmy as a character. I did like the fact that at the beginning Dorothy judged Jimmy and said that he didn't look disabled, he didn't look like he needed this meal service, reinforcing the belief or the fact that actually sometimes people need help and you can't see it physically. So I like that aspect of it. But everything else, while I applaud them for raising awareness, they did it in completely the wrong way. And as I said, it's very unusual. The Golden Girls usually gets it right every time when it comes to sensitive topics. And speaking as somebody who has been in Jimmy's shoes, and I'm sure will be in Jimmy's shoes again, as I said, for many people, it's something that comes and goes. I thought they handled it very, very irresponsibly. And I don't necessarily think the episode will be dangerous to people interacting with somebody like Jimmy and like myself, because I don't think Dorothy was exemplary. I don't think anybody watching this would look at Dorothy and go, yeah, that's the right way to treat somebody like this. I feel like Dorothy's ignorant attitudes were maybe a little obvious. I hope. I hope that's the case. I hope nobody watching this thinks, yes, Dorothy had exactly the right approach here. But I do think that if you are the Jimmy of the story, then it could be quite dangerous and damaging, and it could produce a setback. So it's not a good episode. It really, really isn't. If I had no experience with this, maybe I would feel differently. But in my opinion, this episode is written to benefit people like Jimmy, like myself, like other people who have ever been in that situation. And unfortunately, they are so far from hitting the mark with this one that ultimately, also just the title as well, Snap Out of It, absolutely hate it. I think maybe they weren't being serious with the title and they were trying to show that you can't just snap out of it. And that was an attitude that was unhelpful, and they were trying to say, well, actually, you can't snap out of it. This is a better approach. Helping him is a better approach. Taking one step at a time is a better approach. Maybe. Or maybe they did mean it. Maybe the title is just telling people like Jimmy and like myself to snap out of it. Let's hope not. Let's hope at the very least the title isn't being intentionally insensitive. But that being said, somebody could perceive it that way. Needless to say, while I think Snap Out of It had really good intentions, the execution of the narrative is ultimately quite a disaster.